Okay, so this is the bronze floor cap, daily cap, deep dive, if you will, looking at some of the different tiers of cards, and how much they're used, which ones seem to be performing the best out of the different tiers. So without further ado, here's your top position players and pitchers from the bronze floor cap. First of all, it's a best of 5, except for the final round, which is best of 7. The average overall rating is 72, which when you factor in that cards that are rated the minimum of 40 are basically already like sort of populated, built into the cap. So 26 times 40 leaves you with 315 points available above the minimum of 40 to build your team. It uses modern era stats and strategy settings, so you're going to want 5 starting pitchers. They're going to be used on a fairly limited pitch count because of modern strategies, so 110 pitches is generally what you're going to see. You're going to want 7 or 8 relievers, so you're going to run a 12 or 13 man pitching staff. Out of all of the data that I had collected, I think it's still a fairly small sample size, to be clear. But the league-wide WOBA was 344, and the league ERA, tournament WOBA and the tournament ERA was 344, and the tournament ERA was 4.69. So it's a fairly highly scoring tournament. There were a total of 728 batters used and 687 pitchers used across I don't remember off the top of my head how many tournaments I pulled data from. 15-ish, I think, maybe a little bit more than that. But those were so there was a pretty high amount, pretty wide range of batters and pitchers used. Again, with 728 batters used and 687 pitchers used. All right, so the way that I broke this up was because it's a cap tournament, I didn't necessarily want to go position by position. Instead, I broke it down into tiers. And I mentioned 40 earlier, which in this case was a little bit incorrect because it's the bronze floor, which means it's a minimum of 60. So 60 times 26 leaves you with what your baseline is for your cap, and then whatever you fill in above that out of your 26 players, which is why there's only 315 cap points available, which brings you to a total of 1,875. Anyways, so back to what I wanted to do. Because it's a cap tournament, I didn't necessarily want it to go position by position. Instead, I broke it down into tiers. So these were the most used, basically like free cards, right? Because they're only 60, which is already built into the cap. So you can add as many 60s into your roster as you want, and it doesn't count towards your cap space because that's already built in. So Emilio Bonifacio was the highest used one with just over 4,000, just shy of 4,500 plate appearances. Daryl Thomas, Joe, did I remember this correctly? Joe LaFay, Max Carey, Daniel Nava, etc., etc. You can see the list. So these were the ones, and I kind of loosely used about 1,000 plate appearances as my cutoff for, if I included guys in the slide or not. So coming in at number 10 was, I'm kind of blocking that. I need to put my camera in a different spot. Coming in at number 10 was Phil Massey, a 60 overall catcher, 2,600 plate appearances, a 286 WOBA, which equated to a runs above average per 600 of -30. So over the course of approximately a full season, he's going to be 30 runs worse than the average player, which kind of makes sense because, again, you're in a tournament where there's all kinds of cards ranging from 60 to 100. His bat score versus lefties was 46.79 versus righties 48.81. So not a whole lot of splits there. He's number 10 out of the most highly in ranking of, these are ranked by WOBA also. So these are ranked by their WOBA within that specific tournament too. Number 9 was Corey Snyder, 1,600 plate appearances, a 291 WOBA, which equated to about negative 28 runs above average per 600 plate appearances. Definitely a splitty card, has a lot of power versus lefties. However, he doesn't draw any walks, and he also strikes out a lot. So 52.68 versus lefties, 47.10 versus righties. But he does offer a pretty fair amount of versatility. So again, for somebody that doesn't count towards your cap, will occasionally come in and be able to come up with a big home run, plus provide you with some versatility at third, short, left, and right. This is actually not I'm surprised that it's not a little bit highly used. But again, it ranks 9th out of the most used 60 overall cards. And then number 8 was Bonifacio, who is the most used card. 298 WOBA for a negative 24.07 runs above average per 600 plate appearances. I wonder if I should have broken that down into a little bit different, because by 600 is, of course, over the course of a full season. You're really only using them at most for about 100 plate appearances because it's in a tournament. Anyways, 51.19 versus lefties, 46.13 versus righties. Really, really BABIP dependent with this card. Obviously, significantly better versus lefties. But again, provides coverage at 5 different positions: third, short, left, center, and right. So basically Corey Snyder without the home runs and adding center field and some BABIP as well. But again, solid infield range, solid outfield range. Provides coverage at 5 different positions, which is why he's so popular as a bench filler. I actually think that I have him starting at third base versus lefties on my bronze floor cap team. And then at number 7 comes Chuck Knobloch, about 2,400 plate appearances, a 299 WOBA, a negative 23.75 weighted runs above average per 600. Again, another one where oh yeah, okay, never mind. I did put his score in there. Scores very well versus lefties, a little bit lower versus righties. Only plays second base and doesn't really do it that well. Kind of low on the range. Commits errors. Obviously, Chuck Knobloch was famous for his inability to throw to first base at one point in his career. Really avoid K dependent, and I think that the problem that this card is running into is that with the high avoid K but low BABIP, he's putting a lot of balls, low BABIP and low power. He's putting balls in play, but when he does, nothing good happens, right? Because again, he's low BABIP and low power, so he's not hitting home runs, and he's just hitting the ball and he's just out. Instead of striking out, he's just out in the field. And the defenders, obviously, there's enough good defenders in this tournament where, even despite scoring kind of highly, his WOBA is definitely suppressed a little bit. At number 6 was Joe LaFay. This was one of the more popular ones. Just shy of 3,400 plate appearances. Cracked 300 on the WOBA at 301, but still 22 runs below average per 600. Again, that's isolated to within this tournament environment, because I built the WOBA and then subsequently the weighted runs above average out of the stats specifically from this tournament. This one is versus righties dominant here. Again, pretty big splits with a score of 51 versus lefties and 59.97 versus righties. High gap, high BABIP. Pretty high on the Ks, pretty high, not going to draw a lot of walks either. But again, for a minimum rated card, you're, getting okay performance out of him. And of course, he covers third, left, and right, all sort of adequately. Number 5 was, again, for the minimum cards, was Wade Boggs. Just shy of 2,100 plate appearances, a 308 WOBA, for negative 18 on the weighted runs above average per 600. 48.57 versus lefties, 54.57 versus righties. Obviously, as a left-handed batter, he has pretty pronounced splits. You know, not great defense, not terrible defense at third. I think because I'm guessing the difference here is, like, I go back and I look at Chuck Knobloch, and then I go look at, you know, who has a 299 WOBA. Wade Boggs is a 308 WOBA. Despite ratings significantly lower, kind of makes me wonder a little bit. And I think it's probably the BABIP that is making the difference here. With it being higher, it's high enough that, you know, with the high avoid Ks complemented by the high BABIP, he's able to have significantly better results with his balls that are put into play. So despite scoring fairly low, he actually is able to kind of outperform my rated scoring system, which might need some adjustments. Next was Daniel Nava, again another popular one, 3,000 plate appearances, a 312 WOBA, negative 16.75 on the weighted runs above average. Again, another very high BABIP card, solid versus righties with the 79 BABIP. A little bit of power, a little bit of walks. And he plays first, left, and right, although, I mean, you're probably best using him in right field. But again, not somebody that you really want to play every day. But in a cap tournament where he's essentially a free card, you're getting to, you know, we're sort of nearing a league average from a minimum card, which is pretty good performance. Third was Max Carey, again, just over 3,000 plate appearances, 319 WOBA, negative 13.05 on the weighted runs above average per 600 plate appearances. I think a lot of people are starting him in center field in this bronze cap tournament. High BABIP, high avoid Ks, high gap, not a lot of power. And again, obviously he's, as a left-handed batter, he's pretty splitty. Serviceable in the outfield with 76 range and 79 arm. Obviously, it's a popular one, and out of the minimum rated cards, you know, he ranks number 3rd in WOBA, so he definitely gets the job done as far as your production from a minimum card. Next, at number 2, was the least used out of our minimum rated cards. Wilson Contreras, All-Star from 2019, 1,322 plate appearances, a 334 WOBA is for a negative 5, so just 5 runs below average per 600. So very, very close to being league average. Obviously is pretty splitty with a heavy emphasis on his VLs, but again, we see 74 power, 64 eye versus lefties, and so yeah, that power and eye combination I think is really what's pushing him up. And again, it is a small sample size, so fair warning, it's a small sample size, but you know, from a minimum rated card, I think you're getting very, very solid production here at catcher. He's not very good at catching, which is kind of a problem, which is probably the one thing that's held him back, because bat-wise, he's one of the better options. But the catcher ability of just 54 definitely leaves a lot to be desired there. I believe on my team, I currently have him as my backup catcher behind King Kelly on my bronze floor cap team. And then the highest, not rated, but the highest performing bronze minimum card is right fielder Bill Robinson. 1,648 plate appearances, just edging out Wilson Contreras with a 335 WOBA for negative 4.59 weighted runs above average per 600. Very high scoring, 57 versus lefties, 54.26 versus righties. Doesn't draw any walks, and he strikes out a lot, but that 87 power combined with the 60 BABIP versus lefties definitely gives him a significant boost, and he covers 3 positions adequately at third base, left field, right field. Strong infield arm, decent air, decent outfield arm. So Bill Robinson was the highest rated bronze minimum card. Not highest rated, but highest performing bronze minimum card with his 335 WOBA. And I think that the rating system kind of bears that out there. As we see the high power leading to that higher WOBA, and I think the only one that was higher was going back through these. Joe LaFay versus righties is very high, but that's very gap dependent as well. So maybe I need to reduce my weight that I'm giving to gap a little bit. And then Chuck Knobloch was the other one that was really the only one close that rated closely to Bill Robinson there with 59 and 54. But again, that's very gap and very avoid K dependent. So I might need to lower my weights that I'm giving to those ratings just a little bit, because he's not performing up to what his score should be. All right, so that concludes the bronze minimum portion. Next, we had just the bronze cards, 61 through 69 overall position players. Ozzie, the Platinum Series 1 Ozzie Smith card, very, very popular. A lot of people using him as their starting shortstop in this tournament. Followed by Chipper Jones, Joe Morgan, Jason Kendall, Chick Hafey, the limited edition Davey Force, seeing a significant amount of use here as well. And again, we have that 1,000 plate appearance threshold as our cutoff for these cards. I included this just so that you guys could see where he's at. Falling outside the top 10, at least hitting wise. Obviously, his fielding is providing a pretty significant boost here. Ozzie Smith came in at 12th with his 5,900 plate appearances. Only coming out to a 319 WOBA for a negative 13 weighted runs above average per 600. So several of the bronze minimum cards outperformed him hitting wise. Obviously, none of them come close to how good of a fielder he is at a very important position at shortstop. With the 82 range, 96 air. Arm's a little weak for shortstop, but again, I think he's higher than a lot of the other bronze cards that would be used in his position here. So that was where Ozzie Smith fell. Now going into the top 10, we have Willie McCovey, just over 1,100 plate appearances, a 321 WOBA, negative 12.22 weighted runs above average. So, but only 2 points above the minimum here. Willie McCovey getting the job done as a, option if you were punting first base versus righties. Willie McCovey would be an okay option there, only costing you 2 points to your cap. Not a good fielder at all. I know that the 63 first base rating, I think, is a little bit deceptive, because a lot of that is dependent on his height. Willie McCovey, I think, is 6'3" or 6'4", because his actual infield ratings are atrocious, with his double play at 35 being the best. But good BABIP and good power. Although he strikes out a lot. I'd like to see a few more walks, but again, obviously if he had more walks, he'd be a higher rated card. 51.47 versus lefties and 57.98 versus righties. At number 9 was Davey Force. Lots and lots of like greenish bluish here on this card. The problem is he's got a 4. Count them 1, 2, 3, 4 for power, which I think really hampers what he's able to do WOBA wise, because he also doesn't generate a lot of walks, with that being his next lowest rating after his power. Just shy of 3,000 plate appearances in the data that I collected, a 323 WOBA for negative 11.31 weighted runs above average per 600. A little bit better versus lefties, 54.22 versus righties, 52.89. But some versatility on the card there with serviceable defense at second, third, or short. Not quite Ozzie Smith at shortstop, but I like the 72 range, 75 air. I think ideally second base, because I think the arm's a little weak for third base. So ideally you're paying him at second base if you're using him as a starting option, or as a bench guy for a cap tournament. He fills in those three positions pretty adequately as well. Although with this level of plate appearances, somebody's probably starting him. Next, this one really surprised me. I don't know if he was just having a really bad cold streak in several tournaments that I was in that I pulled data from. But coming in at 8th was 69 overall Chipper Jones. 38, almost 3,800 plate appearances. A 320, just a 324 WOBA for negative 10.42 weighted runs above average. So again, we had three cards. No, I think just 2 cards. Just 2 of the 60 overalls. That, like Bill Robinson at third base, better third base defense, and outperformed him WOBA-wise. So really, really surprising there by that. Obviously, he's significantly better versus righties. 58.09 versus lefties. 64.14 versus righties. The power, I'm really, really surprised that with the power and the eye combination that he has, especially versus righties, that he just was not performing as well. Maybe with the low defense, people are using him as a designated hitter, which is harming his batting stats a little bit. I'm not 100% sure. This one definitely puzzles me a bit. Next was Roger Bresnahan, limited edition 66 overall catcher, 1,400 plate appearances, a 330 WOBA for negative 7.35 weighted runs above average. Really, really solid card here. Doesn't do a lot besides draw walks. And he draws a lot of walks. 55.85 versus lefties, 54.07 versus righties, so slightly better versus lefties. But I believe he's a switch hitter, if I'm not mistaken. Excellent, thank you, Dish. Gary Carter is officially fixed. But again, very walk dependent. Better catcher than Wilson Contreras, and a similar WOBA, the 330 WOBA versus the 334. But you get the boost of, at 6 extra points, you get the boost of him having 67 catcher ability versus 54 catcher ability. So there's Roger Bresnahan. Number 6, again, this one is another bit of a surprise. I would have expected him to stay higher up on this list, but I think he had a couple cold tournaments which kind of pushed him down. Maybe with a better sample size, he kind of boosts back up. But coming in at number 6 was Chick Hafey. 3,100 plate appearances, a 331 WOBA, negative 6.97 weighted runs above average. 61.22 versus lefties, 63.24 versus righties. The biggest problem with this card is that if he's not hitting home runs versus righties, he's striking out, or he's striking out too much because he doesn't draw any walks either. So again, we run into great power, but I think you need some walks to go with it to really have some sustained success. Don't really want to use him left field. You know, maybe he's being used as a DH, specifically a designated hitter versus righties. I think that's how I'm still using him. But for costing you 8 of your cap points, I feel like I would want a little bit better. You know, there's obviously some cards that are performing better than this Chick Hafey card has been across his 3,100 plate appearances. Coming in at 5th, just ahead of Chick Hafey, 1,500 plate appearances for 61 overall Tris Speaker. So if you're sitting on your bronze cap team and you've got 1 point available, and you've been running Max Carey as your center fielder, switch Max Carey to Tris Speaker. That is my suggestion to you. Switch Max Carey to Tris Speaker and go from a 319 WOBA to a 333 WOBA. 53.82 versus lefties, 59.86 versus righties. Low BABIP and low power, but he doesn't strike out, and he draws walks. So I'm not entirely sure where this WOBA is coming from. I guess he's hitting enough doubles and triples to push the WOBA up. Obviously, he's going to draw a significant amount of walks with the 76i and the fact that he's not striking out. So he's either walking or hitting a double, apparently. But 74 range, 86 error, 72 arm, in the outfield, so I think he's a slightly better fielder than Max Carey is as well. Number 4, one of my favorite bronze first base options is Bob Hamlin. 2,156 plate appearances for a 334 WOBA, negative 5.03 weighted runs above average per 600 plate appearances, 55.6 versus lefties, 63.5 versus righties. Again, it's another high power, high walk combo guy. This one able to almost be tournament average for somebody that's only costing you 4 cap points, which I think is makes him a useful card. Slightly better defensively than William McCovey. Slightly higher range. Everything else is pretty comparable. But again, I really like the high power, high eye combo guys. They seem to perform pretty well, with apparently the exception of Chipper Jones for some reason. And here you can see that here with Bob Hamlin. Coming in at number 3. Coming in at number 3 out of our bronze cards was 69 overall Delino DeShields at second base. Just over 1,000 plate appearances for a 339 WOBA. Again, just approaching that league average WOBA. Weighted runs above average of per 600 of negative 2.7. 58.3 versus lefties, 63.2 versus righties. Again, another one of those. I like this profile. Obviously, it seems to perform fairly well. High-ish BABIP, but also high avoid K. Lots of doubles and triples, which I guess is what's pushing him up here. And then he also draws a fair amount of walks, while also playing okay second base defense. Obviously, a significantly better defender than Chuck Knobloch, and a better hitter than Chuck Knobloch as well. Ooh, excuse me. Oh. I'm going to be so annoyed if I did all of this recording and then YouTube mutes it because I haven't left this music on. That's going to be unfortunate. Although actually, I think that my recording ignores the music, so we might be able to just cut this out and completely ignore this. This conversation never happened. At number 2, Vladimir Guerrero. Limited edition, 68 overall, 1,400 plate appearances, a 350 WOBA. We get our first guy that is above league average. 3.16 weighted runs above average per 600 plate appearances. Solid 62.4 versus lefties and 59.6 versus righties. Doesn't draw walks, but he also doesn't strike out, but he's got the BABIP and power to make those not strikeouts pay off. And we're seeing that here with the 350 WOBA. Plus some solid corner outfield defense. Not really much range, not really great at not committing errors, but he has a strong arm. So there you have number 2 out of all of the bronze cards, Vladimir Guerrero. And then coming in at first, second baseman, build a lineup, 66 overall, Joe Morgan. 3,300 plate appearances, so definitely one of the more popular options here. Somehow put up a 359 WOBA for 7.78 weighted runs above average per 600. Just 53.8 and 59 for the bat score. Obviously with the low power. I guess somebody's starting him at second base and he's only facing righties. That's the only thing I can think of here. I don't know what else is driving this WOBA up so high. But again, it's that profile where he doesn't strike out, but draws a lot of walks. And with that high, I guess he's got a high enough BABIP to make the the 84 gap pay off. Because doesn't have home run power, but if he's not striking out, he's got to have a good BABIP to take advantage of the high gap power, I guess. I don't know. That's the only thing I can think of that's able to really push this up that high. All right, so that will move us on to the silver cards. Obviously, with it being a bronze floor, that's the bronze cards see a pretty significant amount of use. We see a little bit less use here as we move up into the silver tier for position players. Chick Stahl, Paul O'Neill, Mickey Tettleton, Bob Bailey, all being very popular options here. And again, just the 7 cards really that saw a significant amount of use in this tournament. The lowest performing out of all of those, surprisingly, I think a little bit, is 71 overall tournament edition Howard Johnson. 1,500 plate appearances, a 318 WOBA for minus 13, minus 13.94 weighted runs above average. And then versus lefties 61.14 versus righties 68.75 were the card score. High power, high eye. So I'm surprised that he's not performing better than that. The 318 WOBA is definitely feels a little bit low. I'm really surprised that he's not performing better than that. But he does provide you with some fair utility if you're using him as a bench option with this third base, shortstop, left field, and center field eligibility. Although I really hope you're not playing him in center field with the 69 range, 55 air, 56 arm. Not a great center field option. So hopefully you're not playing him in center field. And hopefully you're getting better performance than this 318 WOBA that he has for some reason. Because he's got the power. He definitely should be performing better than that. So that is a bit on the puzzling side. Next, at number 6 was first baseman Boone Powell. 1,800 plate appearances, a 320 WOBA. Negative 12.64 weighted runs above average. So again, we see our first couple silver cards here being outperformed by a very significant amount of silver cards. Or, I'm sorry, very significant amount of bronze cards. So, make sure you're really paying attention to what's going on. If you're thinking, oh, I've got some extra points, I'll put them into these, I'll upgrade from a bronze to a silver. Well, you might not really be upgrading unless you're going to the right silver cards, because these first 2 silver cards that we saw had several bronze cards that outperformed them. My guess is that too many people are letting Boone Powell face lefties because he strikes out and doesn't draw walks. But versus righties, lots of power, better at not striking out, and also better at drawing walks versus righties. So pretty splitty card, plays solid first base defense. Excuse me. At 5th, Platinum Series 1 Edition, Mickey Tettleton, another Baltimore Oriole. 2,200 plate appearances, a 331 WOBA, minus 6.69 weighted runs above average. 62.7 versus lefties, 62.84 versus righties. So he's a switch hitter, strikes out a ton, but also draws a lot of walks and hits home runs. So again, this is another card where I'm really, really surprised that he did not perform better than this. Like, I mean, there's bronze cards that put up a better WOBA than he did, which is just not making any sense to me. So I'm really unsure as to what's happening here, unless the only thing that I can think of is that because it's a tournament and people don't have their bench set up correctly, that he's playing too much when he's tired, and as a catcher he's getting tired quicker, and it's pulling down his batting performance, so you're seeing a lower WOBA from him, despite having very, very good ratings overall. Number 4, Bob Bailey, 2,100 plate appearances, a 344 WOBA, 0.05 weighted runs above average per 600. Basically, completely and entirely league average. Low BABIP, but high power, and should have a fair amount of walks, especially versus lefties. I have to think that if you're platooning Bob Bailey and he's only playing versus lefties, you're getting a significant amount better performance than this. I think that he's probably facing too many right-handed pitchers, which is driving down his ratings, because again, he's very splitty with a 74 versus lefties, but dropping down to just a 62 versus righties. So we see that with obviously 112 power versus lefties and 91 eye versus lefties as well. Number 3 on the list, Tournament Edition Chick Stahl, Covers all three outfield positions, 2,700 plate appearances, a 348 WOBA, 2.02 weighted runs above average per 600, 60.07 versus lefties, 66 versus righties. So a little bit of a splitty card, but we see more of that profile, which seems to be working well in this tournament, where we've got a high BABIP, we've complemented with a high avoid K, and throw in a decent eye there as well, especially versus righties. So yeah, we're seeing this is where he doesn't have a lot of power, but he's got a high enough BABIP to complement the high avoid case. So yeah, you don't want both of those, one of them to be high and one of them to be low. They kind of need to work in concert with one another. Is a solid outfield position across all three outfield positions, left, center, and right as well. And then number 2 was Cal Ripken Jr., just over 1,200 plate appearances, put up a 360 WOBA, 8.57 weighted runs above average. Rates really highly, especially versus lefties. 67 versus lefties, 64 versus righties. And again, we see it kind of, really the only thing that he doesn't do is draw walks. Doesn't strike out. Decent power, decent BABIP rating as well, especially versus lefties. So we see some good things here. And not great defense, but not terrible defense at third base. I've seen worse defenders in this tournament. You know, the one drawback is that he's costing you 19 points, and the defense might be hurting you a little bit. Number 1, everybody's favorite silver tournament card, which is very, very hard to obtain because Out of the Park Baseball and Perfect Team do not like apostrophes. It causes all kinds of problems for them, apparently. But 2,600 plate appearances for Paul O'Neill, put up a 370 WOBA, 13.83 weighted runs above average. So we're seeing somebody that's significantly above average here. 68.85 versus lefty, 68.37 versus righty. So almost no splits at all on this guy. Great BABIP, good power. Strikes out more versus lefties than he does versus righties, but makes up for it by also drawing a significant amount more walks versus lefties as he does versus righties. So lower BABIP, but more power and more walks versus lefties than he does versus righties. The arm is basically a noodle. Can't play in the outfield. Corner outfielder of 61 and 61 in both corners, with 63 range, 80 error. So he's a solid fielder. Just don't expect him to get any outfield assists or throw anybody out. All right, that wraps up silver. Now we move on to gold, where again the player pool keeps getting thinner as we move up through the tiers here. Really, the only guys getting significant playing time here are Toby Hara, Double Duty Radcliffe. We see our first 2A player, and then Rocky Colavito as well. A very popular limited edition card in this tournament. First, or last, as it were, Rabbit Marinville, 951 plate appearances, which probably were all mine. And once I started compiling this data, I realized I was making a mistake because there's no way that defense is making up for a negative 30 weighted runs above average per 600 plate appearances. There's just no way. So 951 plate appearances, a 286 WOBA, negative 30 weighted runs above average, a worse hitter than Chuck Knobloch, a 58.76 versus lefties and a 52.8 versus righties. So yeah, I mean, he's a 60 overall bat, and I think he would have been, well, I'm not going to go all the way back through all the slides, but I think he's worse than all of the other 60 overalls that I had in there. No BABIP and no power, so the high avoid K is basically wasted. Again, nothing good is happening when the ball is in play, and he doesn't draw enough walks to make up for it. So yeah, that's the problem with no BABIP and no power. It doesn't matter how many times you don't strike out if good things aren't happening when the ball's in play. He does play fantastic defense at second base or shortstop, but again, for 22 of your cap points, I just don't think the juice is worth the squeeze on this one. It was a mistake that I was making that I have since rectified. I am no longer making this mistake. Hopefully you don't make that mistake either. Fourth, Double Duty Radcliffe, 2,600 plate appearances, a 308 WOBA, negative 18 weighted runs above average, 51.61, 51.04 were his bat scores. This one, I'm a little bit surprised. I mean, you're getting a bronze level bat here for somebody who's a solid starter, right? He costs you 20 points. But he provides basically a minimum level bat on top of whatever he's doing. And we'll get to his pitching stats later. But you get the bonus of having a minimum level bat. I'm a little bit surprised that he's not performing better, but I guess the low walks, the low I rating with the low power rating is just not adding up. You can play him at catcher or in center field. He's fine at either one of those positions. But yeah, definitely a below average bat. But again, that's, kind of that's kind of free, because again, you're putting him on your cap team more so for his pitching, I hope. Third was Andy Pafko, 1,271 plate appearances, a 335 WOBA, so slightly below league average here with a negative 4.8 weighted runs above average per 600. Another card that seems to be underperforming a little bit, 65.83 versus lefties, 64.1 versus righties. Low batting average on balls in play for sure. But he's got a lot of power. So I think it's kind of tough because he doesn't draw any walks, and so even with, he's kind of BABIP dependent with that high avoid K, and I guess the power is just not quite pushing up as high quite as I would expect. Great corner outfield defense, and also the ability to help you out at third base or center field if you're desperate. But predominantly a corner outfielder with a slightly below average bat, but very, very good corner outfield defense for a grand total of 20 points. Next, number 2 was Rocky Colavito, 2,042 plate appearances, a 361 WOBA, so we make a big jump up here, going from Andy Pafko's 335 all the way up to Rocky Colavito's 361. 8.69 weighted runs above average per 600 plate appearances, and we see the big jump in score here as well. 73.84 versus lefties, 69.84 versus righties. So obviously a little splitty, very, very strong versus lefties. Again, we see the low BABIP, high power, high avoid K profile, but this time we've got the eye to go with it. I think that is, obviously the power and the avoid K are higher, but the addition of the ability to draw a walk here really makes a difference for this card. Plus, he plays serviceable defense at either of your corner outfield positions. And then our last gold card here was Tournament Edition Toby Hara. And again, 2,800 plate appearances, 364 WOBA for 10.35 weighted runs above average, 74.11 versus lefties, 66.9 versus righties. Another splitty card, very strong versus lefties. Low BABIP, medium power, medium avoid K. But the highlight of this one is his 125 I rating. Plus, he plays second, third, or short. So covers 3 of your infield positions, draws an unbelievable amount of walks, especially versus lefties. Also very strong versus righties. But yeah, with that, with that high of an eye, plus the not striking out, you need some power to go with it, and he's got, I think, just enough here that this makes him your number 1 option at gold. So if you find yourself with 27 cap points available and you need an infielder, look no further than Toby Hara. All right, so now our next tier is Diamond. We actually start to see, at least on the high end, our usage go up a little bit as we get into some more high end bats here. 6 players were above the 1,000 plate appearance cutoff that I was using for this data set. So Ken Griffey Jr., Jack Clark, Giancarlo Stanton, Babe Ruth, Edgar Martinez, and Prince Fielder were the ones that made the cut there. Coming in at number 6, I think a bit of a surprise for this one, is Ken Griffey Jr., 4,200 plate appearances, so he was the most popular out of these 6 cards, but the poorest performing, at least offensively. Obviously, this is not factoring in his defense at all, and he plays a very, very competent center field. But 4,200 plate appearances, a 388 WOBA, so 23.28 weighted runs above average per 600 plate appearances, 66.5 versus lefties, 73.7 versus righties. This card is highlighted by his very, very high power, especially versus righties. Draws a fair amount of walks. Everything else is kind of just right down the line there, about the same, 65, 66, 68, and 72 versus righties, being where he is the best. And again, it's the worst performing out of these diamond cards, but that's not factoring in his defensive contributions at all. Number 5 was Prince Fielder. Again, this one, I think it's the low I, although, I mean, his eye is better than Griffey's. So we see 1,094 plate appearances, a 396 WOBA, 27.3 weighted runs above average. 74 and 77 were the 2 bat scores. Obviously stronger versus righties. High power, high avoid K, high gap. A little bit lacking in the walk department. But obviously it's performing very, very well for a 91 overall first baseman. Well above the tournament average, which you would expect from somebody that's costing you 31 of your points. Next was Jack Clark, 2,700, almost 2,800 plate appearances here. Again, actually, is that identical WOBA? It is an identical WOBA of 396. I think it's just slightly higher because his weighted runs above average is 27.39. 86 versus lefties, 75 versus righties. This is one of the highest rated cards versus lefties that we have available in the game. 111 power, 116 gap, 125 walks. So again, with the 74 avoid K, I think you're getting just enough on the avoid Ks, plus all of the walks and the high power. You're seeing a lot of home runs and you're seeing a lot of walks. Plays first base or right field, probably preferably at first base because that range and error is not good even with the strong arm. But yeah, he's obviously performing exceptionally well here with, as you see, the 396 WOBA, providing you 27 runs above average per 600 plate appearances. And then we have Giancarlo Stanton, 2,223 plate appearances, a 404 WOBA, 31.46 weighted runs above average. Again, 79. So the ratings are not as good as Jack Clark's, and I think the distribution of them, is what's helping him out here. Because we see 123 power versus lefties, strikes out a lot, doesn't draw as many walks, obviously, with the 90 versus the 125. So I don't know if it's the addition of having a slightly higher BABIP or having slightly more power, but this card, a little bit surprising to me, is outperforming Jack Clark. I thought that he would be a little bit better than this, and obviously his defense in left or right is better than what Jack Clark would provide for you as well. Obviously, this is a platoon bat. You don't really want him facing right-handed pitchers unless you're facing some of like the minimum right-handed pitchers in somebody's bullpen. At number 2 was Edgar Martinez, 1,400 plate appearances, a 408 WOBA, 33.8 weighted runs above average. Very, very strong card, but I guess, in this tournament, you could probably play him at third base, but preferably he's your designated hitter. And then the number 1 diamond was Babe Ruth with 1,800 plate appearances, a 410 WOBA, 34.47 weighted runs above average. Decent corner outfielder defense option as well. Another guy with very high power and very high walks, despite the fact that he's going to strike out a lot. I think the walks and the power definitely outweigh that. And you can see that obviously because he's the number 1 performing diamond card out of this tournament. So that moves us on to the perfect tier. And this is where you see the effect of all of the min-maxing, which is definitely the trend here in this tournament. You see a lot of bronze cards and you see a lot of perfect cards. We have 3 guys on this list top 10,000 plate appearances. So, at number 8, Bullet Joe Rogan. And we'll get to his pitching later. But hitting-wise, 16,345 plate appearances. How are we doing here? Okay, I think we still got some time before our next set of ads comes up. Great. I want to make sure I keep an eye on that. So, 16,345 plate appearances, a 352 WOBA, 3.99 weighted runs above average. Basically, for the 40 points that it costs you towards your cap, you're getting basically a slightly above average hitter with somebody who has an exceptional arm. And again, we'll get to his pitching stats. But 68.11 versus lefties, 65.3 versus righties. Again, slightly above league average bat. So not a terrible option to be using as a two-way player and be using out in the field. Because again, he's one of the better pitchers available. But like I said, we'll get to the pitching stats. At number 7 was King Kelly. I broke this down because again, I think my theory about him playing tired as a catcher too much affecting his performance. We see 4,000 plate appearances as a catcher and 1,700 plate appearances as a right fielder. 400 WOBA for 29.42 weighted runs above average. But his bat score is 82.78 and 81.15. So this is definitely a card that should be performing better than what it is. I guess maybe it's the power holding it down. I don't know. His power rating is pretty low. And then at number 6, we have Jackie Robinson. 4,600 plate appearances, a 403 WOBA, 30.78 weighted runs above average. 78.8 and 77.3 were his scores. Basically, lots of walks, no strikeouts, and a fair amount of balls in play and home runs as well. Great second base defense at 103. With the one thing that might be slightly holding him back is the at shortstop is the low-ish range and low-ish arm. But again, for 100 overall, very, very solid performing here, well above league average. Not a whole lot of complaints about his performance. All right, and then at number 5, we find Brooks Robinson, 7,200 plate appearances, just slightly edging out, actually more than just slightly edging out, 409 WOBA for him, 33.8 weighted runs above average. With a score, again, slightly beating out Jackie Robinson's score versus lefties and versus righties, 82.29, 79.27. Plus, he's the best fielding third baseman in the game. With its 127 rating. Better versus lefties than versus righties, obviously. And unfortunately, one of the things that I forgot to update and include in this was the percentage of lefty and righty pitchers being used in the tournament, which would be useful information to know. I just forgot to include it. Number 4, we have Joe Morgan. 4,200 plate appearances, a 412 WOBA, 35.5 weighted runs above average. Obviously very splitty, but very, very, very strong versus righties. So hopefully you have a platoon partner for him, or you're just hiding him at the bottom of your lineup versus lefties and hoping he gets a chance to face some weaker, minimum priced bullpen guys that are sure to be used on a lot of teams. All right, and now at number 3, we come to Hank Aaron and his 14,500 plate appearances. A 415 WOBA, 37.4 weighted runs above average. He's amazing versus lefties. I think that's my number 1 highest rated card versus lefties at 91.95. Versus righties, just 78.14. So there's definitely some better options out there versus righties. But if you're spending 40 points and you're using a perfect card, you can do worse than Hank Aaron. Great corner outfield defense as well, with the ability to play him at first base, I guess, but not really where you want him to play. You have to unmute yourself, is what I was not saying, but it's what I'm saying now. So Willie McCovey, 10,183 plate appearances, a 437 WOBA, 48.9 weighted runs above average. Excellent scores of 80.67 and 87.33, and up until tonight was the second best available, not just first baseman, but second best available bat versus righties in the game. However, he has been surpassed by Cooperstown Club number 2, Jim Thome, who I'm sure we will see in this tournament next time. But excellent power, excellent eye, serviceable defense at first base. Please don't play him in left field. Please don't. But Willie McCovey is your second overall perfect tier card available in this tournament. And of course, to the surprise of no one, the number 1 overall performing perfect card and number 1 overall performing card in general is Lou Gehrig with his amazing card art. His plate appearances, 6,047 plate appearances, so obviously not as popular as is just a packable card. It's not quite as accessible as some of the other mission cards like Willie McCovey. A 441 WOBA equated to 50.8 weighted runs above average per 600 plate appearances, 86.37 versus lefties, and a whopping 92.07 versus righties, plus some excellent first base defense. There's not a whole lot to say about this card other than it's fantastic, and anywhere that is playable, please play this card if you have it, because I think the data kind of backs up what we're seeing on the back of the card here, right? Like, my score system says, hey, guess what? This Lou Gehrig is the best hitter in the game. Well, I just ran a tournament where your bronze floor cap data, all that I pulled across 6,000 plate appearances, he was not miles better than Willie McCovey, but he's a couple runs better than Willie McCovey. So, you know, again, to the surprise of no one, Lou Gehrig is the highest performing card in this tournament. Who knew? All right. Now, this, excuse me, this should go a little bit quicker because there's fewer pitchers for us to go over. And again, there weren't really enough minimum pitchers with a high enough innings pitch threshold to really use to break the 60 overall cards away from the rest of the bronzes. So I lumped them all together. Here are your bronze pitchers and their innings pitched. First up, or last up as it were, live Luis Perdomo, 711 innings pitched, not a one start, which makes sense since he's a reliever. 395 WOBA against. For those counting at home, that's really bad. Surprisingly enough, no stuff, decent movement. Shouldn't be giving up home runs, but I think the stuff is just so low that it just doesn't matter. he's given up a really high WOBA. And he's very popular, 711 innings pitched. Probably want to take him out. You could probably find a better 60 overall card to use besides Luis Perdomo. At number 9, Pedro Feliciano, another 60 overall card, 568 innings pitched, a 391 WOBA against. Slightly better arm score, obviously better versus lefties. The medium stuff, high movement, absolutely no control profile. In this case, not really holding up that well. At number 8, another 60 overall card, Boone Logan. 462 innings pitched, no starts, a 383 WOBA against. So again, we're moving in the right direction, but again, still pretty bad. Maybe, as a lefty specialist, he's not terrible. I like the stuff. I like this profile slightly better than the no stuff high movement profile. So yeah, 85, 77, 47 versus lefties. That's really where you want to use him if you're using him. You really want to try and just have him play against lefties. And then Lucas Gilbreth, 486 innings pitched, a 375 WOBA against. So again, moving in the right direction. A small sample size, but moving in the right direction. No control. I guess it's working better than the other 60 options. So there's at least that. He's at least got that going for him. Good stuff, great control. Good stuff, great movement, no control. So it's an interesting profile that, despite how I'm weighting these ratings, is probably outperforming them a little bit. So again, something for me to kind of keep in mind and reconsider as I kind of am continuously reevaluating the scoring system for these cards. And then we come to our first starter. Build a lineup. Kevin Brown, 61 overall, 1,100 innings pitched, 55% games started. So our first starting pitcher, a 374 WOBA against, 52.6 versus lefties, 58.03 versus righties. Similar to Perdomo, but for some reason outperforming it. Low stuff, good movement, and sort of some control. Able to slightly outperform the Luis Perdomo card that we saw. And then at number 5, we have Arthur Rhodes, 831 innings pitched, so a very popular option here, a 367 WOBA against. Again, similar profile to the Pedro Feliciano card that we already saw, but this one is working a little bit better for some reason. Maybe because of the extreme. What was Feliciano? Feliciano was a ground ball pitcher, and Arthur Rhodes is extreme fly ball. So yeah, I guess the extreme fly ball is working a little bit better because with that super high movement, any fly balls that are hit are more likely to be lightly hit. So this profile seems to work a little bit better if you are an extreme fly ball tendency as opposed to a ground ball tendency. At number 4, another starting pitcher. However, he is not being used as starting pitcher. Again, another minimum overall pitcher. 699 innings pitched, just 2% game start percentage, a 365 WOBA. Obviously, the scores are still very low because we're talking about minimum priced pitchers. Yeah, slightly better versus lefties than versus righties, but it's it's a minimum priced bullpen filler arm, right? Although he performs better than most of them. At number 3, splurging a little bit for probably potentially people's 5th starter, Larry Christensen, 435 innings pitched, 45% game start percentage, a 357 WOBA against, 55.35, 56.75 for the arm scores. You know, decent movement, decent. I say decent, but better stuff, better control. A little bit low on the movement, but it's not hurting. He's performing well out of all of these bronze cards that we've looked at so far. And then at number 2, we find Minimum Denny Galehouse, the highest used bronze pitcher. 2,076 innings pitched, 10% game start percentage, a 354 WOBA against, despite being pretty significantly underrated here as opposed to Christensen. I don't know if it's this profile with high stuff and high control is better than my card scoring system thinks that it should be, but clearly over 2,000 innings, there's only been one bronze pitcher that has performed better than him. And it is, but actually, before I go to that, I think it might be. Well, see, this doesn't make sense in this case because as a fly ball pitcher, his low movement presents a problem. But obviously, it's working better than I think that it should be. At number 1, we have Stan Bonson, 579 innings pitched, 12% game start percentage, a 339 WOBA against, 52.52, 52.8, so like no splits. Similar profile to Larry Christensen, just a little bit lower with the, just kind of a little bit lower across the board, right? 62, 55, and 68 were his ratings, with just a tiny bit of a boost to his movement versus righties. I don't know, it's working. I don't know why it's working so well, but it's definitely performing better than my card scoring system thinks that it should be. Moving on to the silver pitchers, there were only 3 of them with any kind of significant usage because, again, everybody's min-maxing their pitching staffs with as many hundreds as they can get into it and then a whole bunch of bronzes. So we have, again, just 3 that saw any kind of significant playing time. The lowest rating of those 3 was Steve Busby. The Live 20 mission reward for Kansas City, I believe he is, 467 innings pitched, 99% games started. So people are using him as their 5th starter. 346 WOBA against, decent card scores, especially versus righties, 57 versus lefties, 65.9 versus righties. 81, 77, 75 seems to be working okay for him. Although, again, maybe there's better options for your 5th starter. Like, I think maybe our card that's up next, Jack Harshman, gives you 4 more cap points to play around with. 1,459 innings pitched, just 54% game starter percentage, and a 343 WOBA. So just 343 WOBA against. So just slightly better. This is the first time we've seen this profile with the high stuff, high movement, low control. The high and low. Although we've seen, well, I guess Gilbreth would be this profile, although he had worse control than this. Stamina, good hold runners, excellent curveball, extreme fly ball profile. So that movement is doing some work there with the extreme fly ball profile, keeping those balls in the park. And it's just a matter of, avoiding walks as best you can with the 45 control. And then number 1, performing silver card in the bronze floor tournament, limited edition Carl Hubble, 75 rated overall, 725 innings pitched, 89% game start percentage, a 338 WOBA against. So we definitely see a pretty significant step up here from Harshman to Hubble. And I think, again, we see where the maybe the movement isn't as important as we think it should be, because we see the high stuff and high control, low movement profile being the best performing out of these 3 cards. And now, again, moving on to the gold ranks. Again, not a popular option here for people. There's just not a whole lot of usage here in this tournament because, again, you're seeing a lot of as many 100s as you can get and then stepping down to filling in the rest with bronzes. At number 3, previously mentioned as a hitter, this time it's Double Duty Radcliffe with 1,078 innings pitched, 100% of them as a starter. Not a great 355 WOBA against. I think all of our silver pitchers were better than that. 338, yeah. So all three of our, interestingly enough, all three of our silver pitchers pitched better than Double Duty Radcliffe. I don't know. Again, I guess the movement is just not as important as I thought it should be. 70 stuff, 91 movement, 63 control. There's something seems amiss here. I feel like the silver cards that we saw should not be outperforming Double Duty by as much as they are, but the data is what the data is. So again, maybe he's being used too much as a batter. If there's enough people using him too much as a batter that he's not recovering in time for his starts, he's pitching tired, that might be affecting his pitching numbers. I don't know. Just presenting that as a potential option. Next, at number 2 was Kevin Brown with 2,165 innings pitched, 99% game start percentage. So again, playing basically exclusively as a starting pitcher. 344 WOBA against, 67.47 versus lefties, 72.5 versus righties. Similar profile to Double Duty, just slightly moving everything up a little bit. 73 stuff, 101 movement, 74 control were the overall ratings. He has lots of pitches available to him. None of them except for his sinker are really any good because he's got an extreme ground ball tendency. And at number 1, out of the most used gold cards, was limited edition 82 overall Christy Mathewson. 839 innings pitched, 96% starting percentage, 63.95 versus lefties, 66.68 versus righties. An astounding 318 WOBA against for Christy Mathewson. And we see, basically a repeat of our Jack Harshman profile here, right? With 87 stuff, 92 movement, just a little bit of an edge going up from 45 to 54 control. The reverse splits with the excellent screwball for him. Really, really, really good performing card. That at 82 overall only cost you 22 points for, as we'll see, what amounts to nearly 100 overall performance. At Diamond, again, it's just, with the way rosters are structured, almost nobody's using Diamond pitchers. Sid Fernandez and Mark Pryor saw some use, so I threw them in here. Mark Pryor, 410 innings pitched, 100% of it as a starter, a 331 WOBA, 71.87 versus lefties, 72.72 versus righties. Better than Brown, better than Double Duty Radcliffe. Outperformed a little bit here by Christy Mathewson. Mark Pryor, if you really have to use a 99, he's not a terrible option. However, that being said, I'd much rather use Sid Fernandez. 605 innings pitched, 100% of them as a starter, 315 WOBA against, so just barely outperforming Christy Mathewson. But we see kind of that similar profile here, right? With 117 stuff, 88 movement, and then just the 65 on the control. It's, again, 98 overall. If you're really short 2 points, or you need to free up 2 points for a significant upgrade elsewhere, you're actually not losing a whole lot by dropping down from a 100 overall to the 98 overall Sid Fernandez. Which, of course, brings us to our 100 overall pitchers. Again, this is where, there's a pretty heavy concentration here at the top for these guys. A tiny bit of uses for like Pedro Martinez and Jim McCormick. Paul Derringer's working his way up there. And of course, we see Cooperstown, Carl Hubble, Kevin Brown, Jerry Royce, Vida Blue, and Bullet Joe Rogan. Checking in at number 8. There's no way that Christy Mathewson is outperforming Pedro Martinez here, right? I'm sure that this is just a small sample size thing, but 495 innings, 100% games started, a 321 WOBA against. So both Christy Mathewson and Sid Fernandez are outperforming Pedro Martinez. I'm struggling a little bit to see that continue. I feel like that's a trend that as we get more data on this Pedro Martinez card, that's not going to hold up, and that WOBA is going to continue to improve. Next was Vida Blue at 3,845 innings pitched. A 314 WOBA against, so just slightly better than Christy Mathewson or Sid Fernandez. 79.83, 80.68 were his arm scores. Great stuff, great movement. Control being the lowest of the three here. But again, at an 82 overall, it's still excellent, and it's working out very well in this tournament. At number 6, in a virtual tie with Vida Blue, was Jim McCormick. 642 innings pitched. Again, all of them as a starter. 72.83, very splitty card. 72.83 versus lefties. 82.62 versus righties. Obviously, you can see the big splits there with the stuff, the movement, and the control. Actually, less so the control. Most of his splits are in the stuff and the movement. But he's performing very well here with, the 314 WOBA against. Significantly below the league average here, which is what you want. And then we see at number 5, the 100 overall, Kevin Brown. 2,491 innings pitched. All of them as a starter, not being used in the bullpen at all. A 310 WOBA against, 78.3 versus lefties, 83.3 versus righties. So again, little bit of a split there, but not a terrible one. And then moving on to number 4, we finally come to Bullet Joe Rogan. 7,726 innings pitched, all of them as a starter. 310 WOBA against. So again, virtual tie here with Kevin Brown, just slightly, just the tiniest of percentage points better. The 310 WOBA against, significantly better than league average. 71.92 versus lefties and an 87.8 versus righties. Massive splits here on Bullet Joe Rogan. But I think in this tournament he's facing enough weak bronze bats that it is not mattering. So again, Bullet Joe Rogan comes in as number 4. And again, for those 40 cap points, you get the 4th best starting pitcher and also an above average bat, although just slightly above average. So yeah, you get the 4th best starting pitcher available, or at least out of the ones that were, had a significant sample size. You get the 4th best starting pitcher plus an above average bat for your 40 points. You're not going to find much of a better combination there, which is why he's got 7,700 innings pitched and 16,000 plate appearances. At number 3, Cooperstown Club Carl Hubble, 1,621 innings pitched. Again, all of them as a starter. A slight improvement here to a 307 WOBA, 81.98 versus lefties, and the reverse splits, an 85 versus righties. The triple 100 versus righties really stands out there. I think that's the first one of those that we have seen, right? Yes. At number 2, just slightly better than Carl Hubble out of the data that I have. 2,769 innings. Jerry Royce, all of them as a starter. A 306 WOBA against. I mean, there's almost nothing separating these top 4, right? Kevin Brown, 310. Bullet Joe Rogan, 310. Carl Hubble, 307. And then Jerry Royce at number 2 at 306. And so, As we come to the end here of this video, our number one overall starting pitcher, or at least our number one performing starting pitcher, is Platinum 2 Edition Paul Derringer. 996 innings pitched, 100% of them as a starter, an astounding WOBA against of 289. Somebody is playing a very, very good defense behind him. There's going to be a lot of balls in play, and some of them are going to be hit fairly well here, with the stuff being 84. But the movement of 108 and the control of 101 really, really stands out here on this Paul Derringer card. Minimal splits, basically the same here, right? You're just losing a couple points of stuff and a couple points of movement. So almost no splits, just the tiniest bits of splits. Fastball, curveball, and knuckle curve. If you've got an extra 400,000 points, sure, go get yourself a Paul Derringer. Actually, it might be more expensive than that now even. Go get yourself a Paul Derringer. He's by far the number one performing starting pitcher in the data that I have. Again, it's a little bit of a small sample size, but 996 innings pitched is also not anything to sneeze at. All right, so I am blocking a little bit of this. I will post these slides later. This was just kind of a recap of our position players, and this time sorted by WOBA, and showing the WOBA and the weighted runs above average as well at each tier. So you can see some of the guys that were just outside of the list. Christian Vasquez, Darryl Thomas, George McBride. They see John Farrell. They see a significant amount of usage, but they do not perform well at all. If you're going to use 60 overalls, Bill Robinson, Wilson Contreras, Max Carey, Daniel Nava, all are the best performing out of those, with pretty significant steps up there. And again, you see the same thing in the bronze tier. There were a few that weren't mentioned. Tony Kubik is very popular, not a good hitter. Jason Kendall sees a significant amount of use as a catcher, rated 13th overall out of the non-minimum bronzes. So, there's some better options out there, so keep that in mind as you're building your bronze floor cap team. And of course, the silvers, golds, diamonds, and perfects are all on here as well. Moving on to our pitchers, this one was a little bit trickier to get on here. I included their weighted runs above average, it'd be the opponent weighted runs above average against for them for each tier: bronze, silver, gold, diamond, and perfect. Again, in this instance, negative is bad. Like, for instance, if we look at Paul Derringer, again, across his 996 innings, all of them as starts, he had a 289 WOBA against, which equated to him being 27 runs better than average. He was, I guess at preventing runs, 27 runs better than average per 600 batters faced. And of course, I have FIP on there as well. He had a 3.38 FIP, so you can see that on all of these slides as well. So hopefully you enjoyed this video breaking down the different player tiers and all of the data that I had pulled for the bronze floor cap tournaments. I am some plans to make this a bit of a series. We'll look at eventually the high silver floor cap tournament, the low gold cap tournament, and the low bronze cap tournament as well, are all in the works. Assuming this is popular and people like what they saw here, we can make this into a bit of a series. So if you're watching on YouTube, that is where this is going to end. Thank you very much. Hopefully you have liked this video and subscribed to the channel as I look to make this a bit of a series and put more of this information out there for everyone to peruse. Thank you very much for watching, and have a good day.